So as requested, here is the presentation for the people who couldn't attend the meeting, The Joy of Podcasting and What It Can Do for Your Business. This is me, Andy Clark, professional journalist, as you can see, lots of experience, now focusing on communication consultancy. One of my main areas is podcasting. I also produce the English language podcast here in Holland. Not sure what a podcast is? Netflix for audio is a good way of describing it. Online radio, it's on demand, that's one of the key features. Available on smartphone apps, both Android and iPhone. It's actually pre-installed on an iPhone, a purple app with the word podcast on. And you can download many different apps for Android in the Play Store. Podcasts can be as short as you like, from 1 minute to even up to 4 hours. There's freedom to say what you want and freedom to make what you want in terms of length. Podcasts are becoming more and more popular. In the US, they've been popular for quite a while, also growing in popularity here in the Netherlands now as well. They first came around in 2004. Back then it was a little bit more clunky, hooking up iPods to computers and things. Now it's all via smartphone apps, just like the rest of things these days, of course. So it's super easy. A program called Serial was produced in the US in 2012, and that was the start of the revival of podcasting. That program, which is a real-life investigative journalism piece into a murder, has been downloaded around the world more than 100 million times. Worth checking out. Very exciting. Produced just like a thriller, a real page turner. So you always want to tune in to the next episode. Public radio in the US is heavily into podcasting. They really understand that the future of media, all media, not just audio, really is online and on demand. And podcasting is, of course, just that. An example of a highly produced podcast by a whole team of producers. RADIOLAB is one of the best-known US public radio programs and also available as a podcast, so it now has an international worldwide audience too. This is a story they made about a whale stuck in fishing nets off the coast of California, 18 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. This first piece of audio is the scene setter, so I'll just play a little bit of that.
And our story begins one morning in December.
Probably 8 o'clock in the morning or something, as I recall.
This a few years back. Mick was just kind of sitting at home.
I was at home, yeah. It was the middle of December. We didn't have any work.
But then he gets this call.
Hello? I got this call. Hello there.
It was a call relaying a message from a fisherman way out at sea.
18 miles maybe outside the Golden Gate Bridge. They told me that there was a whale in trouble, tangled up in crab gear, and it didn't appear to be able to move.
So after he hangs up, Mick immediately calls a few dive buddies.
Tim Young,
Air Force Pararescue.
and then let's see,
James Mosquito,
James Mosquito.
professional diver.
I called him and said, hey, here's the deal. Are you interested?
It was a no-brainer.
I said, yeah, I'm in.
Absolutely.
Figured, all right, we're going.
So I packed up my stuff.
Grabbed my gear and I went directly to the boat.
So as you can hear, that's very quickly edited together to create a sense of drama. I love the guy's name, Mosquito. You have a great image in your head already of this super dynamic guy diving onto the boat to go and rescue the whale. I'll play a little bit of the story itself now as the story unfolds further to let you hear how that sounds
I was there
too.
with a 6-inch dive knife,
Cutting out line right near her eye.
which was the size of a grapefruit. And her eye was moving, keeping an eye on me.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
He would go left, her eye would go left. He'd go right, her eye would go right.
She was tracking me.
And all the while, they're just cutting as much rope as they can.
You really had to saw at it. It was very strong, very tight. Sometimes I'd cut a rope and it would be a loose rope and all of a sudden something else would tighten up. Which was the one rope that would let it all free.
This whole process took hours. But finally, James gets to the end of it. He's at the tail sawing his way through that big clump of line, and he realizes at a certain point that to cut through all that line...
I'm going to have to stab the whale to get my knife underneath the rope. It was that tight, though. I jabbed my knife into the whale's tail and pulled the rope and then cut it.
And at once the rope went...
It was a very surreal moment looking down and seeing the 20 crab traps and buoys.
So this is a great example of a highly produced podcast produced by a whole team of people. Obviously a storytelling podcast using drama, using all kinds of audio techniques to create an atmosphere around the story. This is a more simply produced podcast, an interview-style podcast from the Financial Times newspaper. It's helped them reach a whole new audience as well online. They do interviews with entrepreneurs. So here's a little fragment from that too.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Moles, and you're listening to FT Startup Stories, a 10-part series providing an insight into the challenges of creating and growing a business. The theme of this episode is risk-taking. This is particularly apt for Tristram and Rebecca Mayhew, the husband and wife team behind the treetop adventure business Go Ape. 15 years ago, they were working in well-paid executive jobs, but they wanted to move out of London, where they thought it might be easier to combine their working lives with raising a family. What they lacked was a business idea. Then, during a holiday in France, they spotted a leaflet for an outdoor adventure park, so they went to take a look. I spoke to them at their latest venue in London's Battersea Park.
We were visiting some friends and we saw a leaflet and we just went, we need to go and have a look. It looks brilliant. So we did.
What was it that was attractive?
Well, I had been specifically trying to focus on areas which I thought I would naturally enjoy, the outdoorsy stuff.
So that's an example of a more simple interview-style podcast. This is much easier to reproduce for yourself, for your own business, this sort of format of podcast. Some figures from the US on podcasting. Now you can check these out online, of course. Just Google the EDISON report. It's called the Podcast Consumer 2017. Yes, you can read this, of course, too. 1 in 4 people in the US listened to a podcast in the last month. Audiences are growing quite quickly, and people actually tend to consume the content as well, which is very important, of course. And it's not just an older audience. This is research from LinkedIn from last year, and it shows that 42% of people under 35 listen to podcasts according to their research. And people who have higher management positions are even more likely to listen to podcasts and consume this sort of content. Again, this is from the LinkedIn survey. A very important point is that podcast listeners actually choose to listen to what they're listening to. Radio is just on in the background. People sometimes describe it as kind of wallpaper. There's a famous quote from Roman Mars, who is a leading US podcast producer. He says, 1 podcast listener is worth 10,000 radio listeners. Well, maybe a bit exaggerated, but the point is clear, I think. And a little bit of audio trailer from his network there. Actually, I think I'll miss that out on this video. Another thing that people always say about podcasting is that it is very intimate. Jair Stein is a leading producer in the Netherlands, one of the best radio producers, podcast producers working for the VPRO organization. And this is a famous quote from him saying that, listening to a podcast is like listening to a friend whispering in your ear. Listening to radio is like listening to someone screaming at you with a megaphone. So I know which of those two I would prefer. Here are some fragments from my Here in Holland podcast about life in the Netherlands. It's focused on expats. It's in English, obviously, so I make podcasts talking about different experiences, the idea that people can hear other people in the same boat and they will feel more at ease, more at home by sharing their stories on the podcast. There are anecdotal podcasts and there are also some interview podcasts. So this first anecdote is about Dutch directness.
Okay, so being South African, and I don't know if this is because of the British influence, but we are quite PC people. We say please and thank you for everything. We're very mindful of what we say, obviously given the history of our country as well. You don't want to offend anyone. The Dutch are very direct. And in the beginning, I thought it was very rude, but I've realized it's taken the cookie sweet layer away and just saying it like it is. I remember going to a shopping mall. My son is one of those kids that he doesn't like shoes. It's on its feet, he'll take it off. And it was in the middle of winter last year, and he'd taken them off. We were in the shopping mall, and he's sitting in his kinderwagen, in his stroller, And I have this random lady coming up to me and say, "Do you realize your child doesn't have shoes on?" Yes, I dressed him. I'm aware. I said, "He doesn't like shoes." She says, "Well, it's winter here." And she just walked off.
Okay, and this is another one which is about rude awakenings from a program called Rude Awakenings. I'll just play those two in the video version here.
One of the most shocking stories that happened to me in this country is going to a health spa. Back home, we have the hammam, so it's similar to what they call in the West the health spa. And I love it. I enjoy it very much, especially in winter. It's very nice to be inside and enjoy the water a bit. So we entered those websites, which again were a surprise to us, where you bid and then you get vouchers to go to health spas. So we were too enthusiastic. We bought vouchers for 2 different health spas because we love it that much.
This was to go for massage, for sauna, that sort of thing?
Yeah. This is a place where you go for massage, sauna, jacuzzi, my favorite part, and there's usually an indoor swimming pool. So we went to this health spa. So of course we had our swimming suits, our towels and everything. And we were shocked when we first got into the reception that we're not allowed to wear our swimming suits. So I was like, okay, what else? She said, nothing. You need to really you need to be inside naked, completely naked. And I was
So you can check out Here in Holland by simply going to hereinholland.com and listen to all of the episodes there. These are single stories from the longer podcasts. Each podcast itself is around about 15 to 20 minutes, some a bit longer. Our podcast effective? There is research from the US which says it is very effective, that advertising in podcasts is working very well. Again, because people opt in and tend to be very committed to the content. So there is a study here from this US ad agency saying that 2/3 of listeners acted on ads, either researching something or actually buying something. So that's quite high, obviously. And there are more and more different companies now looking to advertise in podcasts. Why is podcasting interesting for business? Now, you can use it to reach your key stakeholders directly. It gives you the chance to claim a space as a thought leader in your field. You can set the agenda, interview people you think are important in your field, and then you can promote that to your community. You can use it to build a community and generate discussion, answer people's questions. It's great for knowledge sharing, and when you hear the voices of those directly involved, it will increase impact. It's great to hear stories from customers, for example. You saying you're great is nice, but other people saying you're great is even better. You can use it to set the agenda. It's an alternative voice to mainstream media, which may not cover your niche at all, so you can create some coverage by doing it yourself. It is a more affordable and an alternative channel to video production. There's a potential to reach a huge audience through the smartphone apps, the way podcasts are distributed. Everything runs through the iTunes store. Once you have submitted your content there, then it is available to all apps, whether they are Android or iOS. Integrated with social media, so you can promote your podcast by creating lots of small snackable content and sharing that on social media. It can establish your authority as an expert in a given field and can also be used to tell the stories of customers, involve stakeholders directly, and it is on demand, as I think I have mentioned. Why do people like podcasts? Stories, so many wonderful stories from around the world. We communicate through stories and people love to listen and consume them. Life-improving tips and advice, how to get rich, how to get thin, how to be beautiful, tons and tons of podcasts on those sorts of things. It's super easy. You can listen on your phone. It's free and it's top quality content. You can listen while you're doing other stuff, which is great. Try and watch a YouTube video while you're cycling to the station. A bit tricky. It's intimate, again, back to the quote we heard earlier from Yair Stein. Niche, specialist, in-depth content on a subject you are passionate about. So you can find tons of stuff on what you want to consume and not on what some editor at some station decides they think might be interesting for you. Is it easy to make a podcast? Minimal investment is needed. You can get the equipment or you can use your phone and add a microphone to your phone. Open source software can be used to edit. Publication and distribution is also very straightforward and very cheap. Once your podcast is in iTunes, as I mentioned, then it will be syndicated across smartphone apps, both iPhone and Android. So you have a huge distribution network, which you don't have to pay for. It's already there. To ensure quality, though, just starting is a bad idea. Of course, you need to make a plan. You need to have a clear focus and a target audience, one of the main things. Develop a format. So is it going to be an interview podcast? Is it going to be a story podcast? Is it going to be something else? You need to invest in some training and coaching at the beginning, or buy it in. You can always get someone to produce the podcast for you, of course, depending on your budget. But investing in training and coaching in the beginning, and after a few sessions, you will be up and running. You need to edit the podcast, take away the dull moments, integrate the podcast into your strategic communication. So what role is it going to play? And you need to be realistic about the time needed to actually make the podcast. You can make a podcast once you are vaguely competent in a few hours if you have somebody to interview, the topic is clear, and they're a good speaker. Production standards, think about where you record, think about the quality of the recording and the editing. If it's really bad quality, then people will leave. So, I hope you have got a brief idea of what podcasting is and what it can do for your organization. If there are questions, then you can reach out to me. I am easily contactable. Surprise, surprise. I have a podcasting website with lots more links and info on podcasting, podcastingforyou.com. My English language website podcast is here in Holland.com. You can get me at andyclark@podcastingforyou.com or here in Holland at gmail.com, or the phone number, which is here too. So yeah, please reach out. I will be organising shortly a training day in English for people who want to learn more about podcasting and how to podcast, and I will be posting that soon. Okay, this was the presentation then, so I thought I would put it on YouTube because it was easier for you guys to consume rather than sending huge files backwards and forwards. Okay, thanks very much, and please reach out if you want to know any more.